California used to be a red state. Like we would vote red in many presidential elections. Now, of course, Reagan and Nixon were from California, so there's that there too. But what happened? Where do you start as like the pivot point for California going crazy?
Well, I think two key events happened. First of all, the Cold War ended, and thankfully the West won, due in no large part to President Reagan and his policies. And when the aerospace industry consolidated, and I worked in aerospace for the 13 years before I was elected in 2004, what you found was all of the manufacturing left the state pretty quickly as the companies consolidated and cut costs. And they left because of the high real estate costs, the high labor costs, the heavy regulatory burden, the high energy costs. You know the drill, right? So when that happened, you lost about 400 to 500,000 highly skilled tradespeople. Many of them were classic Reagan Democrats. They were union members, but they voted conservatively on national security grounds. They voted for Reagan. They voted for former Governor and U.S. Senator Pete Wilson, and they left the state. Then I think the other thing that happened was perhaps one of the biggest strategic errors of the Reagan presidency. You had the 1986 or 87 amnesty. A lot of people came into the country on fraud. You know, they they made up documents to be able to participate. And kind of concurrent with that, you saw a surge of illegal immigration that began into the country in the late 70s, early 80s as the economy started to improve. And what happened in California then is you had very significant demographic shifts that occurred, I think, because of these two events. And the state just inevitably began to drift to the left. And of course, that was reinforced by the fact that in America today, and less so in California, we don't do a very good job of assimilation, of basically welcoming newcomers and explaining to them, here's what America's all about, and glad you're here, but here's kind of our history and our culture. And so as a result, I think in California, you had increasing balkanization of the electorate, where a lot of people were susceptible to appeals to kind of a tribalism as far as political appeals to specific groups rather than to a philosophy or to an economic message. And so that's pretty much continued unabated. And I think today you're looking at a potential inflection point where one-party rule has so messed up California that I think a lot of people are beginning to rethink, is this really working out for them and for their families? And so if California does turn around, it's likely going to be because of these new immigrant groups that have moved to California. So for example, look at the Asian American community, which is of course very diverse. Look at Hispanics. They may not necessarily be happy with the current trajectory of California. And therein is the hope for California's turnaround.
Wow, that's okay. Let's talk about a potential for turnaround, because I am not hopeful. So I could use some hope from you. I see little glimmers of hope. Like there was a proposition in California that would have legalized affirmative action and discrimination here in the state, and it was voted down. So that was a big surprise, mostly by Asians, as you mentioned. So but then still, we vote for Newsom, and in San Diego, we now have an all-Democrat city council. We used to be a little bastion of conservatism down here. So I see these little glimmers of hope, but still I see way, way more doubling down. So I don't know, what do you think in the next 10, 20 years for the state?
Well, something that can't go on forever won't go on forever. And so if you have policies that, for example, make it more and more difficult to provide reliable electricity and that lead to frequent blackouts like we see in countries that once used to have a higher standard of living and are now approaching third world status, like, for example, Venezuela, people aren't going to accept that. Certainly the wealthy on the coast, they can afford to have backup diesel generators or backup solar power with a Tesla Powerwall or something. But the vast majority of Californians don't have that luxury. Similarly with taxes, as taxes and the regulatory burden gets higher, more and more jobs are going to leave the state. and eventually things just won't be sustainable.
Wow, that was deep and insightful. I want more of that. Like, subscribe, get more.